Hello, my name is Karen and my channel here is called What Katie Made Next. Most often what I post about is engraving on glass. And one thing I've noticed recently is a lot of people asking questions about how do I start engraving on glass? What tools do I need? What burrs and rubbers and other pieces of equipment do I need to engrave? So I decided what I'd do is make a series of short videos, probably no more than 10 minutes each, covering some of the main bits and pieces of information that you need if you want to start engraving on glass. And this first part is going to be about the tools, the equipment you need to engrave with. The first thing I'm going to talk about is not the actual tool for the engraving, it's some of the safety equipment that you must have if you're going to engrave on glass. First off, you must make sure that you have a mask. This is an FFP3 mask or an N95 mask, but a good quality mask. You do not want glass dust getting into your lungs. It can cause a condition called silicosis. Feel free to look it up on the internet, but you really don't want that. So a good mask or even a respirator if you're going to be doing a lot of engraving. And secondly, what you need is some protection for your eyes. Now, my eyesight's terrible, so I have to use a magnifying visor, but that doubles to protect my eyes. And you maybe can't see, but this is all glass slurry that's sprayed up off the work as I've been doing it. And that would have gone in my eyes if I hadn't had something over them to protect them. It's rare for the bits to break and bits to fly off that, but you might get little chips of glass, something like that. So, a visor, or if your eyesight's better than mine, a good quality pair of safety glasses is absolutely vital. As we go through this, I'll talk about some other bits and pieces of equipment that you might need, but we have to start by looking first at those most important pieces of safety equipment. Now, let's get on with the fun stuff. Glass engraving has been around for more than 2,000 years. The Romans were engraving glass when the year still ended with a BC after it. So you can bet that over those years, a whole range of different types of tools and pieces of equipment have been used to engrave the glass. The very simplest thing you can use for engraving glass is a thing like this. This is a Scriber. This one has a tungsten carbide tip on it. But you can get fancier ones that have got diamond tips. And you can use that to make little lines or stipple onto the glass to do stipple engraving. And it produces the most beautiful, ethereal, ghostly images on the glass. But it's a bit slow, and the glass tends to have to be lit very well to show it up. But there are some beautiful examples of stipple engraved glass that you can look at if you look them up on Google or whatever. So by all means give that a go. This is extremely inexpensive and it's a way to start engraving glass if you don't have anything else. At the other end of the scale, there are big machines that people use to engrave glass. Laser engraving, which lets you produce hundreds of pieces the same, or individually personalised pieces of glass with a big laser. Spindle mounted or lathe mounted copper wheel engraving is probably the most well established industrial process for engraving glass. It involves having a spindle with a copper wheel mounted on a lathe, spinning quite quickly. The engraver coats that with an abrasive powder and then presents the glass up to the wheel to engrave it. And again, just some of the most beautiful engraving can be done that way. It's a very even engraving. Sandblasting is commonly used. Some people even have equipment and they can sandblast at home, so they have to find a way to cut a mask or a stencil and then sandblast using that. The stencil could be a photoresist stencil, or it could be something cut with like a vinyl cutter. But if you have the equipment, sandblasting can give you a very quick, and again it's a lovely even finish on the engraving. A step down from that maybe, which might be a bit more accessible for people to use at home, would be acid etching glass. Again, with that method you need a stencil. It could be a vinyl cut stencil or a photoresist or even a hand cut stencil. Having stuck that onto the glass, you then apply a glass etching gel, which usually contains hydrofluoric acid or something like that, and it eats the exposed surface of the glass and produces a lovely blush of etching onto the surface of the glass. But I'm not actually going to talk anymore about any of those kinds of engraving, because what I do is engraving with a rotary tool. So the rest of this is all going to be about rotary tools and the different kinds of rotary tools and what are the pluses and minuses of some of them. So we can start maybe thinking about pendant motors. Pendant motors are quite robust, strong motors, usually with a flex shaft attached and a handpiece at the end to hold your burr for engraving the glass. There are a number of manufacturers of pendant motors, Fordham and Proxon. Dremel have one in their catalogue, so they're quite widely available. They have the advantage of having a lot of power, a lot of torque, so you can kind of lean in and cut hard into the glass with them without stalling the motor. They can sometimes be a little bit noisier, but not necessarily so. It depends to an extent which kind you buy. At the other end, quite different from that, we have micromotors. Now, micromotors are produced for dental work, for jewellery work, or for nail bars. They are widely available. You can hunt on the internet, you'll find them. But they also vary a huge amount in quality. The advantage of a micromotor is it basically comes with a small box which has got the electronics in it, probably a speed control. Some of them may have a separate speed control pedal. It's not a flex shaft which links that box to your handpiece, it's just a wire, and the motor then is held in the handpiece. Now that makes that very light, it makes it very flexible. It's easy to get the fine control for high quality of engraving. They're a bit quieter probably than the pendant motor, and very easy to use maybe if you've got a small space and you want to be able to put it away when you're done and things like that. On the downside, they tend not to be so powerful, particularly if you're going at the lower price bracket, and some of the ones made for nail bars and things like that. They will often be maybe 60, 65, 70 watt motors, which means if you're trying to kind of lean into the glass with them, they could stall the motor. They maybe won't have the power that you need to do some deep engraving. Having said that, if you're going for the higher price end and some of the good dental micromotors or something like that, they may well have the torque that you need, plus the advantages, I say, of lots of being able to get lots of fine control with this handpiece. I don't use either a pendant motor or a micromotor. What I use is a Dremel rotary tool. Now again, there are lots of companies that make rotary tools. Dremel is only one of them. Proxon do one, for example, and you'll find plenty other examples. And even within the Dremel range, they come in a range of different powers. Now I'm going to be perfectly honest here. The reason I choose to work with a Dremel wasn't because necessarily I think it's the best. It was because I can go to my local DIY shop and buy one off the shelf, and I can get accessories for it there. And if anything goes wrong with it, I can nip back and pick up another one in the afternoon. So that's why I use the Dremel rotary tool, but I'm not saying that it's necessarily better or worse than a pendant motor or a micromotor. It depends on what you're trying to do with it. My Dremel I have fitted with a flexi shaft. So again, I've got the flexi shaft with a handpiece on the end of it, similar to what you would have from a pendant motor. Equally, you can use the Dremel without the flexi shaft, just holding it in your hand, but it's quite heavy sometimes to do that, so I went for a flexi shaft arrangement. Now in a minute, what I'll do is I'll go out into it's actually the back of my garage where my workbench is set up. It's cold, dark and dusty, but still I'll let you see the setup that I have there and how that works for me. One question I do sometimes see asked is, can I use my drill to engrave on glass? And I'm going to have to say the answer to that is probably no. First of all, a drill would be extremely heavy to try to work with. I just don't think that would be possible just in itself. But the other point is, most drills spin at round about 1200 RPM, something like that. Even my little Dremel has variable speeds, but it can spin anywhere between 10,000 up to about 30,000 plus RPM. And that speed of rotation is important. It's that speed of rotation of the tool which lets it cut the glass easily. So that gives you a brief rundown of the different types of tools that are available and some of the advantages and disadvantages of each one. I'm not going to say to you this one is better than that one, because it really depends what you want to do. If you're going to be doing just a little bit of engraving now and again and you want to be able to pack something up and pop it away in the cupboard, maybe a small, cheap micromotor might be the very thing for you. What I would say is, looking at some of those cheap end ones, not the better ones, a lot of them will say not to run it for any prolonged periods of time, so they're not really designed for heavy work. If you're going to be doing a lot of heavy work, then you might be looking to get a pendant motor, just because they're so robust and able to cope with that work. I say in my case, I went for the easy option for me, which was to get myself the Dremel. But again, it maybe just depends on what's accessible to you. Okay, so this is the dark, cold and miserable corner of my garage where I come to do my engraving. And if nothing else, this shows that you don't need any very fancy setup to engrave your glass. Here I've got my Dremel hanging up so that it's suspended, and the flexi shaft is suspended then from it with the handpiece at the end. Having it suspended like that gives me a lot of freedom of movement with this handpiece. The other bits and pieces I have around here, first of all, I have a water dripper system. Now this isn't anything very fancy. I've got an old bottle, I've got some air tubing from an aquarium with a little flow control valve here which I can turn on, and when I do that I get water dripping out this end, and this very kind of jerry-rigged system lets me adjust where that water drips to. You do not need to have a water dripper to engrave glass, but you do need to be able to keep the surface of the glass wet. But you can do that with a spray bottle. You don't need a fancy system like this, but I think you can see that was not an expensive thing to build. And it's just a siphon that siphons the water through. The other thing I have, which again is not essential, but you might want to consider, is I've got a small extractor fan here, which drags in the air and vents it all to the outside of my garage through a little air vent down there. I said at the start that you need to have a mask. You don't want the dust to get into your lungs. So one way or the other, what I have here is a three-stage system of avoiding that. First, there's a mask. Second, there is the water. Now you can see from the mesh around here that using the water means that the glass dust turns into a slurry, so it doesn't get into the air, so you can't be breathing it in. And the third stage, for any bits of dust that do get out there, is this little extractor fan. It's not very powerful, but it's enough to produce a flow of air and pull the dust away from it. So there you go. That is a very, very, very basic setup for engraving glass. The only other thing I've got here is a little holder that I put my glass into. But as I say, you don't need anything very fancy. One last point you might want to consider when you're trying to decide what kind of tool you want to buy. On my handpiece here, I have a thing called a Multichuck. And what that means is I can change that over to take all sorts of different sizes of bits. These little tooty tiny little bits are dental bits. I think the shaft on that might be about 1.5 millimetre. In comparison to that, some of the bigger ones I have are probably at least 3.5 millimetre. So without the Multichuck, in order to be able to take all those different sizes of bits, I would have to change over the collet, what's called a collet, each time to take the different sizes of bits. So the Multichuck obviously makes this much more flexible for me. When you're looking at whichever piece of equipment you want to buy, remember to look at the handpiece. What size of burr does it take and how flexible is it? Some come with handpieces that will take a whole range of sizes of burrs like this one, and some are very specific about what they will accept. And you'll need to have a look at that and decide whether the size of burr it takes is a size that you're going to be able to get hold of quite easily. So that's all I have to say about the different kinds of rotary tools that would be available to you. You'll need to make your own choice based on how much money you want to spend, how hard you're going to work the tool, and really what's accessible to you, what can you get hold of quite easily. But they will all engrave glass and will all make a decent job of it. If you've enjoyed this and you'd like to see more videos, then click the subscribe button, which should be down there somewhere. The next video I'm going to make is going to be about the diamond bars and the rubber polishing bits and the things that you need to put into your rotary tool so that you can engrave your glass. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you will subscribe and maybe hit the notification button so that you can see the next video I produce. Thank you.